Good evening and welcome to Suffering in Silence with Minister Tia on Luv Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We're here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. Luv Bay family, we're rising out of the ashes together. Our topic on this evening is setting healthy boundaries. We have with us our co-host for the evening, Bob Wood, Title IX coordinator of Gwinnett Mercy University. And our guest on this evening will be Minister Wanda Ballantyne of Top Ministries. Listeners, as usual, if you have any questions or comments for our guest or co-host, you can email us at sufferinginsilencedv@gmail.com. If you have any resources that you would like to share with us on a national or local level from your country, your community, local organizations, or your faith community, you can also email us at sufferinginsilencedv@gmail.com. With that, Bob, would you take a moment and greet our listeners?
Yeah, good evening, and thank you very much. Again, I'm privileged and honored to be here to speak with you this evening. As Ms. May said, I'm the Title IX coordinator for Gwinnett Mercy University. I have been in law enforcement, so I have dealt with domestic violence from that aspect. And in my Title IX role, the Violence Against Women Act is part of our policy, and it's part of the Title IX statutes now, so domestic violence does fall under our purview there, and I partner with a lot of our community advocacy agencies, and I'm going to put in a shameless plug, if I may. October 29th on the campus, we're actually doing a walk a mile in her shoes, which means you get to see crazy men like me walking around in red high heel pumps for 1 mile to raise some funds and awareness for the domestic violence cause and issue. And all of our proceeds will go to an agency called Laurel House and some of the other advocacy agencies that we work with. So that's an unabashed, unshameful plug. And we also have a group coming in dealing with Native American women, the Red Dress Cultural Contemplation Walk, that talks about domestic violence and the missing murdered Indigenous women crisis that's plaguing our country at the moment.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing it. And then on the next day, October 30th, Bob will be with us again at Top Ministries because we are doing a domestic violence awareness event through Top Ministries, which is on City Line Avenue, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, at the Marriott. It will be from 3 to 5 p.m. on Sunday, October 30th, and Bob will be one of our speakers. And the point, again, is to bring awareness to the issues of domestic violence. We'll have other speakers. A representative from Laurel House will be there. We will have a Philadelphia police officer and minister who will be there, and a couple of individuals. Jen Peterkin, the host of The Human Experience and also one of the co-hosts on Suffering in Silence, will be with us. Each of the speakers will, speak and share some information. And at the end, there will be a panel discussion allowing the audience to get some questions answered. So we're looking forward to that as well. And listeners, we are waiting for Minister Wanda to join us. And when she does, we will bring her in. In the meantime, I want to share some resources. And this week we have information from Pakistan. So the first we have is War Against Rape. Their website is war.org.pk. We also have Bedari, BEDARI. Their website is bedari.org.pk. And then we have United Nations Development Program. Their website is www.undp.org. And then we have Acid Survivors Foundation. Their website is acidsurvivors.org. And with that, listeners, we will go into our topic, setting healthy boundaries. So again, we're waiting for Minister Wanda to join us. But Bob, as you were introducing yourself and reminded me that you were a part of law enforcement, I thought of boundaries within law enforcement. So could you kind of start us with that? How boundaries will be looked at when law enforcement is brought into the picture?
It's evolving every day. Let me start there. They're constantly changing, and it needs to, because we have more information and we update. When I first went in the department way back in 1970, well, yes, I'm that old. But it was the big thing was to just get the parties apart, and now, we know that people have changed. There's much more training with officers on recognizing the signs of domestic violence. I think there's as far as recognizing the boundaries and the signs, I think the officers have, I know the officers have much more intensive training than they did when I started, because it was evolving as I was reaching the end of my time in it. And one of the main things you definitely want to do in those scenarios is not conduct your interview with two people in the same general earshot space, because obviously somebody may be in fear, and you need to, there needs to be an understanding of that. Separate the people so you can get the best possible story. And again, you have to do some reading in between the lines, because oftentimes, even in that separation, the party who has been abused may still be very hesitant or afraid to come forward.
Yes.
And those are things that you have to work your way. You have to work your way through them. You have to be as sensitive as you can and take your time. And this sounds like a terrible thing to say, but it's how do I phrase this? It was the accepted method of operation at the time to get in, handle a domestic call, and move on to the next call. And we know that that's not a good idea.
Right.
As I said, I think I've told you one time, I distinctly remember one time, I had a lady who unfortunately was shot at. Fortunately, the man couldn't shoot and did not hit her, but I had 5 witnesses, recovered rounds, got the lady to safety, went and did what a police officer should do. I wrote a 5-page arrest warrant, and the first thing the court commissioner said was, "Well, where's the victim?" I said, "Excuse me?" And that's, she's safe with her family at the moment, and my hand to God on this. I'm not signing that unless she comes in, because tomorrow they'll probably be back in love. And no, again, at that time, my first instinct was, "Who's your boss? Give me his number. I'm making a phone call." I got my warrant. The arrest was made, but I also got chewed out for telling the court commissioner I was calling his boss. It's too bad. I don't believe that would happen anymore today. It's progressed that far. There is that understanding that, those actions need to be taken.
Yes.
Also, there's, an understanding of the reading of the physical, emotional signs that, just when I first started wasn't there, but evolved as it moved through.
Yes.
So I hope my answer made sense.
Yes, it does. I do have a follow-up question, but listeners, Minister Wanda Ballantyne is with us, so we want to give her a moment to introduce herself again.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me back, Minister T. I really appreciate it. Bob, it's good to see you as well. Good to see you again from the class that we took. Again, as Tia mentioned, Minister Tia, I'm Wanda Ballantyne. I get an opportunity to be here tonight again, just to assist and to serve you all and be a part of what God's doing.
Thank you. So, Bob, with what you just said, I just want to point out that boundaries exist, I want to say, in different elements, because there are physical boundaries, and then there are the mental and emotional boundaries. Right. So as you were speaking, I could see instances, police officers being involved where physical boundaries were maybe in the moment the priority, but but it does encompass the mental and emotional boundaries that need to take place as well. And so yes.
And as you said, the physical boundary quite often is immediately recognizable.
Yes.
Whereas the emotional comes from using the other tool that I have on my head beside my mouth, my ears.
Yes.
Be quiet, listen, and listen carefully, listen intently.
Yes. And so, Minister Wanda, you mentioned the course that we did. So, Luv Bay, I believe it was in April, Bob helped me to put together a course on domestic violence awareness, and also Professor Adibek Fortson. We did this course together, and Minister Wanda was one of the first people to take part in this course. And so, Wanda, I want to ask you, in light of going through that course,
Yes.
how did the information, during those 5 weeks, how did that information either change what you thought or believed about boundaries, or did it confirm your thoughts that you already had on boundaries?
Sure. I think that's a great question. It actually did both. It confirmed some things that I was high level aware of, but then it also showed me where I needed to implement and have more of a voice or do more things within structure. So the course itself really helped to open my eyes to, again, where there were things that I had been implementing, I needed to further implement, and then things that I've recently been able to apply, even, again, more recent. So the course, Minister Tia was absolutely amazing. Just in the eye-opening of where you don't think where you need to have boundaries at when it comes to domestic violence.
Right.
And that's any abusive situation or any type of a situation, period, that boundaries are needed. So it's almost like the word I was thinking about earlier, it's like taboo. It's like people don't talk, like it's almost like and so
Yeah.
But there was an awakening for me to the point that it really helped me to assist since that course back in April. I mean, it has been wide scale. So I've been exposed to it. So again, it helped to reinforce. It helped me to basically bring some level up and implement some boundaries and set some things in place, So absolutely on both levels.
Right. And so I'll ask you both. Minister Wanda, I'll ask you first. Boundaries can be different for each person, and we do understand that, boundaries are healthy, boundaries are needed. What do you each believe? What do you believe healthy boundaries look like?
I think that healthy boundaries look like, I think in order, it first starts with you, the individual. Right. Boundaries, right? So I think healthy boundaries is when you're clear on certain things for the most part, like, again, not everything, but just certain things you're pretty clear on. I think when you set the expectation, then your boundaries can be respected. A lot of times when you don't have them, or they're not clear, then there's some lines that are crossed. So I think healthy boundaries are when you can help share them in your responses, or how you handle things, how your integrity is, what your commitment is, what your consistency is, how you do your day to day. I think it can be shown that way. I think those are healthy boundaries where your yes is yes and your no is no. Yes. And you're clear about that, right? Mm-hmm. So that's in relationships, that's in friendships, that's in partnerships, that's in people that you meet and come in contact with. But I think first they have to be set with me, being clear about that. Mm-hmm. And that's where the healthiness starts first with me. That's what my thought is.
Yes. So Bob, what do you, and especially because you are on a college campus, with a bunch of young people, what do you believe healthy boundaries look like?
Staying out of the texting zone.
That's it, Bob. That's it.
Yeah, had to go there. No, I everything that Minister Valentine said is absolutely true. I think the first thing is comfort zone with yourself.
That's it.
Knowing what you're comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And that, especially with young people, can be an up and down. type of thing, because again, thinking back to when I was 19, I tell everybody, 19, I was a train wreck. Up and down and sideways. So that's constantly changing. But sort of a self-examination there, know what your comfort zone is, articulate that clearly to the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And good boundaries, don't jump around. You're not here 1 minute.
That was very good. Yes.
And then you're over there, or you do accept something one day and you don't the next day. I mean, if it's a no, then let's be consistent. Right. I think that's the biggest thing with boundaries. They have to be realistic and consistent.
Yes. Bob, that was very good. I'm writing that down because I have to keep that. Good boundaries don't jump around. That is very good.
Absolutely, because your yes has to be yes, or your no has to be no.
Yes.
And you have to be. And if you're not sure, it's always good to have people in your space that can help. Kind of help facilitate that. Mm-hmm. I think relationally, boundaries are not. Again, I think you do need safe people in a safe space so that you can bounce things off of. Especially if you know the type of person that you are, or you don't feel too good about how you might. And again, like Bob was saying, on a college campus, or or even just in a workspace, in the office, people that you meet, you have to let your yes be yes. You can't say with your mouth and then body language says something else.
Yes.
And then tomorrow you switch it. You can't, you can't do both. You got to do either one or the other.
Wow, that makes perfect sense. Nope, that was absolutely beautiful. And so I would ask you, because I know what your professional background is, Minister Wanda, I found that women not only have a hard time setting healthy boundaries for themselves, but it's almost as if we don't even know that we can at times. It's like permission is waited for to secure your own space. And I have seen that a lot more in women than I have in men. So my question to you, Minister Wanda, is if setting healthy boundaries is an issue for an individual, what advice would you give on how that individual can begin to establish healthy boundaries for themselves?
Sure, that's a great question. I like that. I think from experience, lean back in on Bob with young people. I have a 19-year-old. I've given her permission since she was a certain age to set boundaries. Mm-hmm. So as a parent, there are things that I've given her space to say yes and space to say no.
Yes.
Space to say what she likes, space to say what she doesn't. So I think personally, and again, I'm going to twist it around a little bit, because we're not always in spaces where we have certain kind of parenting or upbringings. So some of that is missed. But again, I'm going to go back to the safe space, the safe people. There are people that you do need in your space that can help endorse you, encourage you, help you to be able to navigate those waters, to be able to set those healthy boundaries, like you said, permission. I didn't have that growing up. So somewhere along the line, someone had begun to give me permission. If that meant I had to go to counseling, which I was in counseling and still is in counseling. There's Christian counseling, and then there is other secular counseling. I have them both. But I think in those spaces, I wanted to be able to implement boundaries once I learned a little bit about it. But I knew how it was working so well for me, and the permission that was given. So there was permission that was given through the counselors that I had worked with. But then there were some things that I learned because I listened to talk radio that was helping me to navigate the waters with boundaries. And so it's not always in our upbringing. There are people that we have in our circle. When you have certain people in your circle that you can look to that can maybe help that, because there's always been an older person for me that I can and if they didn't have it, then I was going to another person, and I was trying to figure out along the way. But once the permission was given, to your point, Mr. Tia, once the permission was given, I was in the all out, research. Like I just wanted to, but I gave it to but I realized it with my kiddo. Initially, my husband and I, there are things that we did with her to help her to understand. And we told her, this is not where you go. This is what you do. Right? When you go to school, we tell them you go to school to learn, right? Those are boundaries. You don't go to school to play. You don't go to school. See, and it's in all kinds of areas that we give permission for boundaries. We just don't always do it within ourselves. We don't take care of ourselves. Wellness, right? When it mental health, we don't, right? So we're off balance because we don't have boundaries. So, but I know I'm going off on a rant. Sorry,
No.
but yes, there you have.
No, but exactly, I agree. I have 5 children. 4 of them are adults. My youngest is 9 years old, and I watch her. I do the same. I instill her safe setting boundaries within herself. I instill her confidence within herself. She knows that she can go into her bedroom and close her door, and nobody has permission to walk into her room. You have to knock on her door before, you enter in. If she doesn't say come in, her sisters, her brother, nobody, you can't just walk into her room. She knows when she's in the bathroom, that's her space. The door is closed. You cannot come in. This is my time. And I watch her because I didn't have that when I was a child. And so watching her now, I feel confident that she won't struggle with setting boundaries as she gets older. She understands that even if you are related to me, you can't speak to me however you want. She understands how friends are supposed to operate. You don't yell at each other. You don't just argue and speak mean to each other. So that is something that I see in her, and I'm happy that that's there so she won't struggle, when she's older. And Bob, especially when she gets to college, I don't want her to be a freshman in any university trying to figure out what her boundaries are then. No, we know that now in elementary school, and we build on it. So, Bob, I will ask you the same. And again, because you're on the campus dealing with a bunch of young people, what advice do you give to the young people on how to establish boundaries? Because some of them are, they're just coming in and the college is just so new and they're just feeling life. And how do you talk to them about boundaries? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like, I'm free now.
Exactly.
Well, if you remember a few minutes ago, I said when I was 19 and playing football or trying to play football in college, I was a train wreck. Fortunately, it's evolved beyond that. But no, you're very true. And because it was 1972 when I went in, and the boundary was completely different. It was a completely different world. In fact, what you had said earlier, and I'm going to weave this all in about, you've noticed with women, it seems to be more difficult to initially set the boundaries.
Yes.
Well, that going way back, that's kind of, I think, a learned trait. Mm-hmm. That was something that was automatically expected of a male.
Yeah.
Bam. This, you know what? Don't get in my space. Back out.
You guys get to do whatever you want and say how you want to say it.
And, if a young lady did that, people would kind of, whoa, she's very aggressive. And,
yes.
I chuckled, having been in, again, I'll go back to the police department and also the U.S. Navy. I've served with men and women. And it's a very simple world. I mean, it's just, there's no reason for people that disparity to exist. Mm-hmm. There is no reason. I mean, and it never made sense to me to begin with. So moving forward, it's funny. There's a little bit of what you talked about. I see sometimes it takes the young ladies a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. Some, mm-hmm. Not. I won't say being as a whole, but some it takes a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. And again, a lot of that depends upbringing, where they've come from, what mm-hmm. the expectations were leaving home. I also think one of the best things that we can do as administrators or staff personnel on a college campus is have that conversation that it's perfectly all right for you to be comfortable with your boundaries and put that expectation out there. Mm-hmm. This is not unusual. When I am working with students, male and female, and something is not, my first question is, how does it make you feel? If you're not calm, mm-hmm. then we have an issue. We have to work through this. It's a learning curve on identifying precisely what is acceptable as a boundary and what is not, or what is acceptable in a relationship and what mm-hmm. is not. And that varies. Again, I get varying levels. I get some young people who come in who the expectation is, well, everybody hollers at everybody. Isn't that the way life is? No. And others who, they're my partner, or my boyfriend or my girlfriend, and they'll bend over backwards in trying to keep that person. I'm like, that's not healthy either.
Right.
I mean, I think that's the.
People pleasing. Mm-hmm.
I find myself constantly reminding people, through the grace of God and the patience of my wife, have been married for 43 years. So, my wife's a saint. That's why she's got officially she got nominated for saint. She got nominated for sainthood somewhere around the year 40. But I've told everybody, any relationship, it has to be 50-50. 49-51 will not work. It's just not going to work. At one point, it's going to tip, and that's the learning curve with a lot of the younger students coming in. I mean, as you know, we have an unusual campus. We have a lot of non-traditional age students.
Right.
So, in fact, interestingly enough, I've had more domestic violence issues with non-traditional age than I have at any other time.
So I want to ask you both, Minister Wanda, I'll ask you first. And, we talked about establishing boundaries with college age students. We just talked about that, and we talked about younger children, our children, my 9-year-old and your baby when she was a baby. But how, because I know that you worked with younger children at one point, how can we teach and communicate healthy boundaries, and how to establish healthy boundaries to that younger group of children, high school, junior high school, middle school? How can we get the ideas in their minds? So, for instance, Wanda, when the children don't come from households or parents like us, letting them know, what, you have your own space when you go in your room and close your door, and instilling, when you go in the bathroom, that's your space. That's it. Nobody can just burst in on you. So for those children who may not have that, what are some ideas, or what do you think, how can we get across to them on how to establish that so they don't get to a college campus at 18, 19 years old and they're just blown away with all the freedom that's around them?
Yes, ma'am. I think that's, another great question. I think when it comes to that age group, information is critical for, in a sense, to that age group, but relationship is even that much more critical. So, in order to be able to really have these types of conversation, if it's not in a educational, informational kind of setting, then relationship becomes important, because then you can help them to drill down to understand, what are some things that you like? What are some things that you don't like? Remembering when my kiddo was in this phase. And again, as you stated, I've worked with children over 35 years. And a lot of the 30-year-old and 35-year-olds, they're still my best friends. They're married with their families, and they remember us in children's ministry, or being in a setting where we just called it, we were just kicking it, and we would talk about life. And in those spaces, because of the relationship, there were things that I was able to ask them so that they could begin to think. Because I think the bigger picture is that if you don't give them, and I was thinking about when Bob shared, the word that I wrote down was empower them, empowerment, empower them by asking them so that they can begin to think. Because when they're in those settings, we're not going to be there. And we want them to be able to be okay to think through the process. And this is what I did and do with my kiddo, where I'm not there, or even the younger people that I worked with for over, so many years that are now married with their families, being in that space, initially introducing them from an educational standpoint or informational standpoint, helping them to know that if that's not what you want, it's okay. There isn't anything wrong with that. And if it's, again, from a workshop standpoint, from an informational standpoint, I can only just give you information. If you bring up a situation, I can talk to you a little bit and maybe share a few things lightly. And I'm lightly saying it like, pitter-pattering, because I don't have the real relationship to really help foster that. So, but I think that's how it's established. That's how you can get it to them from an informational workshop standpoint, making them aware of what a boundary is. What does it look like? What does a boundary look like when it's set? What does a boundary look like when it's not set, right? So when you're helping to educate them, now they're like, oh, wait a minute. So the reason why that happened like that is because I didn't say or I said, right? So that's how I think that can happen in a space like that. Bob, what do you think?
I think you're 100% right. And the empowerment section part of it is extremely important, especially when you're talking with them. I've used this with college and high school students. I taught government leadership and ethics, or lack of, as the case may be, however you feel about it. But have you ever had the professor that asks you your opinion, and then after you give your opinion, the professor goes, no, that's not right. They immediately come, and I'm like, oh dear God, then why did you ask my opinion? And that is what you just said is so important when you are talking with young people. They have to be able to say, this is what I believe, this is how I feel, this is what has occurred, without you coming back and saying, well, no, wait a minute, you should have done, as opposed to developing the conversation and letting them evolve to where they want to be and need to be to set that boundary. They have to evolve to that realization.
Yes.
Right.
And that's why those conversations are so important. I'll use myself as an example. As a kid, I was the kid. If you told me I couldn't do it, I did it.
That's any kid, Bob. That's any kid. I'm going to test the waters.
Yeah, it was like, there he goes. And many young people we know are like that. The harder you push for them to go in a direction, they'll go the other way.
Right.
Let them evolve.
Right.
And it's a patient. You have to have some patience in that process.
And I think too, Bob, to your point, with you being in the field for so long, Minister T, in your family, right, when you think of the type of child that you're dealing with, right, so sometimes you can see right off the bat the type of child you're dealing with, right? Then there are some children you're not exactly sure, but one of the things that I'm crystal clear on is if you're dealing with a strong-willed child, then you don't want to tell them no. You want to figure out how you want to maneuver that so that way it's a little bit more palatable. And it's almost like they thought they figured that that's how they should do it.
Parenting 101.
Listen, so it really just depends, too, when you're dealing with that Tia, Minister Tia, right? When you're in that circle with those little ones like that, and they have so much personality, which are beautiful people. I love them to life. But they have been my heart for over 30 years, and I still, you got to know the temperament of that child. And if you're not sure, you do want to tread like that kitty cat, real life.
Yes. Luv Bay, we want to welcome you again to Suffering in Silence with Minister Tia on Luv Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We're here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern with a replay on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern, also on Thursdays and Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern. And Luv Bay, we are continuing to rise out of the ashes together. I want to share those resources again from Pakistan, and then Bob, I will go to you for a question or a comment. I want to share again War Against Rape. Their website is war.org.pk. Then we have Bedari, Bedari. Their website is bedari.org.pk. United Nations Development Program. Their website is www.undp.org. And we have Acid Survivors Foundation. Their website is acidsurvivors.org. And again, these resources are in Pakistan. And again, listeners, if you have information for us to share, please give it to us, and we will make sure that we announce it and share those resources as much as possible. With that, Bob, do you have a question or a comment?
I'm going to comment a little bit on what Minister Wanda just said a second ago with the children and listening, or students and listening, and letting them come to the decision. And completely off domestic violence, but I think I can make this analogy. My very first high school athletic team that I coached, I got to my players and I said, well, what do you think? And they looked at me and said, what? I said, what do you think? Well, the other coach never asked us that. I said, well, I'm not playing the game. You are. What do you think? I want your input. They were shocked. But I think that's, regardless, that's the way that conversation needs to go. That you have to say, what do you think? And give them that freedom. And, just a little plug, we ended up with a state championship out of that, but that's okay.
Way to go, Bob.
It, as you said, it empowers the person you're speaking with to speak and
yes.
to think. And when they come to that, setting that boundary themselves, they know it's solid then for that individual. It wasn't, I know I can do this because this is my expectation. This isn't what somebody told me I should be doing.
So I want to say, I want to emphasize, we have been talking about boundaries so far from the aspect of developing boundaries in young people, how that can be done. But I really want to say that you can have boundaries and you should have boundaries outside of abuse. You don't have to go into or experience a relationship that deals with domestic violence in order to start setting boundaries. You can just set boundaries, just a part of your normal, healthy routine, just being who you are. And I want to say that having boundaries is not about being mean. It's about taking care of yourself. It's about loving yourself. It's not about just drawing a line and, and just pointing your fingers. And no, it really is about caring about you. It's establishing, what you will and will not accept. And that doesn't have to come across in a mean or nasty way. And by that same token, I will say, if you have your healthy boundary set, and if someone doesn't appreciate it, if they don't understand it, if someone does feel like you're being mean because you've established what is healthy for you, then oh well, so be it. Really, because you, again, as you both said earlier, boundaries, good boundaries don't jump around. So I'm not going to change because I'm not sure about what I want to do. Monday, I feel this way. Tuesday, I'll let it slide. Wednesday, I'll go back. And then also you don't want to change because someone else is forcing you or convincing you to change. You know what you feel comfortable with. And I think it's one thing to just, as you're learning and growing and, you go through life, you evolve. There are some things that you may change in and you may develop. But it's completely different to go through a healthy process than to be wishy-washy. And you just go back and forth. So I really wanted to emphasize, you can have boundaries and you should have boundaries without abuse being present. Because another point I just thought of, if you already have boundaries set, some of us would avoid abusive situations.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Healthy relationships have healthy boundaries.
Yes.
Plain and simple. I mean, like I said, I've 43 years I have been with my wife Linda, and I know her boundaries, and I've always respected them. And if I stepped over, she let me know real quick. No, but I mean, she would tell me, no, don't do that, and vice versa. She knows we know each other, and we respect that. What's the word I want? Mental line in the sand, so to speak.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, like I said, what you were saying a minute ago, the boundaries not jumping, the person who changes to meet the needs of their other partner, that's not a relationship. That's one person pleasing somebody else.
Yes. Yes.
That's that 51-49 I talked about, or even worse, 60-40 type of scenario.
And so, Minister Wanda, can you speak to the point of boundaries needing to be and how they should be available in different areas? Boundaries are not just set for relationships. So we're not just talking about marriage. We're not just talking about boyfriend, girlfriend. you should have boundaries in every part, every area of your life. Can you speak to that point?
Absolutely, sure. I think that it's important, again, because you start initially with yourself. I think, as long as you can put your hand on your heart where you're not, it's okay that you step it up, right? Where you're not, right? So, again, because I want to make sure, because of the audience that we could be speaking to, there are people who may just, this is new information. This is like an aha moment for them. I think when you realize what it is and what it is in terms of where you are and where you aren't, which is from the course that I took with you, I realized where I was and where I wasn't. And there were areas that I knew that I was very confident and very secure in, and then there were areas I was just like, kind of like I just didn't know. But to your point, it was almost like I needed permission, but I didn't even understand why did I need permission when I think it's important. So even having, again, boundaries, learning how to make sure those things are set and secure or begin to be implemented and put in place in my own life, I realized that when you have them here, wherever you go, you want to be careful to facilitate those boundaries in a workspace. Also, if you're in the market space or if you're hanging out with friends of friends, like I think it's important no matter what space that you're in, no matter where you are, that those boundaries are facilitated because from a work standpoint, your ethics are at risk, right? From a business perspective, your productivity, that all of that weighs in on what your boundaries are. Case in point, plain example, if you got 2 15-minute breaks and you're taking 20-minute breaks, already there's nothing, there's no line set, there's no boundary line set. I mean, and it is just as simple as that. As you stated earlier, T, I'm going to look down here at my notes, where you're not setting boundaries where you're pointing a finger and it's, it needs to be, yes, like it's not about that. The mentality and the attitude of the heart has to first be, let me harness me. Let me make sure I am in a space where I'm doing, because these are boundaries basically that are set up by the job, right? You signed off and said you're going to commit to these hours of work. And I have this conversation with people all the time. I'm hiring you for 8 weeks. You committed to 90% of your schedule. You've already called out one day. That's 36 hours a week out of a 40-week schedule. You basically violated the boundary that we set that you signed off on, right? So even in that workspace or even in a space in a neighborhood, in a community, there are things that you have to be very crystal clear about. You want us to have those boundaries. Like people set up fences, that's a boundary line, right? Property line, that's a boundary line. It's where you can and where you can't. And so I do think in a workspace, in a friends of a friend's space, in a again, just hanging out over the holiday space, like all those kind of spaces that you're in, the boundaries, you have to be clear within yourself. You have to make sure that you're not being, and from a mental standpoint, an emotional standpoint, you guys mentioned, in a mental standpoint, if you're not crystal clear on why you're setting boundaries to realize it has to do with respect and love, then you're going to be a mean person. And that's not really what you're wanting to foster, but you're wanting to foster healthiness mentally, emotionally, and physically in whatever space that you're in. So I'm crystal clear with the men that I work with, regardless of how they can view me or women can view me, I'm crystal clear. I'm very professional. I'm very proper. I handle things exactly the way that it is, and I don't cut corners. And that's one of the key things too, because that's the ethic. If I'm not going to cut corners in my own life, I'm going to pay my bills, I'm going to pay my taxes, I'm going to do what's necessary. I'm not going to try to find ways around getting underneath and rolling under the carpet and, all these kind of phrases that we can use. My ethics has to start with me. My integrity has to start with me. And so I think it's important when I can have that within myself, then it's easily facilitated in the spaces of others. Now, what I will do to the people-pleasing person, because I was that person, when I wasn't sure and I learned you and I saw where your boundaries were, I backed up. I was like, okay, I didn't quite understand that. And at first it was looked at as being mean or viewed mean because I didn't have boundaries. so it was viewed the wrong way. But then as I, again, came across the information, began to implement those things in my life, realized it was important that I have it established, I began to set some ground rules and say, okay, either I'm going to live above the line consistently, below the line is unacceptable. And that's the Valentine's thing. And that's the way we run, we help out with our kiddo. So I hope that answered.
Yes, it did. And also as you were speaking, I thought of if boundaries are violated, there are consequences, or there should be consequences. So if you find yourself, well, for instance, if you're contracted to work 8 weeks and you only show up for 7, you still want to be paid for 8. That's a violation, and you have to, there's some consequences with that. Your paycheck isn't going to look the same. But when we
exactly, I have to terminate or separate you from your position.
Right. And then, if we look at it in an instance of a relationship, if we go there with a relationship, if boundaries are violated, there should be a consequence. If you are disrespecting me, calling me out of my name, embarrassing me in front of family and friends, if you're putting your hands on me, there should not be second, third, fourth, fifth chance for you to do this again and get it right. And so you should not be saying, if you do this again, this is what's going to happen. If you do this again, because that in some ways gives permission for it to happen again, because you're not following up on what you said.
Right, that's the up and down.
That's the up and down. That's the boundaries that are jumping around. And so, Bob, I would ask you about that. There needs to be some consequences for boundaries being violated. And again, especially, your background in law enforcement, what you've seen. Again, as Minister Wanda said, your yes needs to be yes, your no needs to be no. And if that is broken, there needs to be a concrete follow-up to that. So, Bob, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree 100%. And it's interesting as this discussion of boundaries evolved, the word integrity came in. Because integrity and boundaries are intertwined.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is no separating the two. But as far as consequence, and I'm not going to, if we look out in our public world today, we all too often see where boundaries have been violated and there are no consequences, and the boundaries continue to be violated. And, when I say consequences, again, I'm a Title IX coordinator, and unfortunately, and it's a picture sometimes I have to immediately change. The Title IX coordinator, I'm not here to, cut your head off when I'm doing an inquiry. I'm here to find out what the facts are, try to balance the scales, and especially when I'm dealing with young people, and it's something that's not such an egregious offense that it requires a separation. I'm looking for a restorative educational sense of justice or consequences. And if I assign a training and say, you need to go to this for a couple of weeks to absorb this and let's have a conversation afterwards, I expect it to be done. And if it's not, well, then you're moving into that realm where we're getting closer to, I may have to ask you to separate. I go through this constantly with when I am working a situation under Title IX, the concept of retaliation. And again, it's funny because I can't do this physically because people can't see me, but I actually run a skit for my students where I walk up to a student and say, watch, this is, tell me, is this retaliation or not? And I literally stare at them. I just stare at them and I get real, so-and-so is my friend, and why'd you do that? Why'd you do that? That's a definite violation of somebody's boundary. And there should be a consequence for that. And I tell them that in our institution, there are consequences for it. And we uphold that immediately. So, and the other thing about a consequence, it has to fit the situation.
Yes.
It has to fit the situation. How do I phrase this? Um, if something is, I don't want to say mine, everybody has different levels of how they feel, feel how something impacts them. Mm-hmm. But again, if something is, it falls in the scale, if it's not so egregious that you're way out here and we have to separate, then, deal with it appropriately. If it requires a sit down and a counseling, then sit down and do the counseling.
Yes.
Don't, again, don't tell them, we're going to place you on suspension for 3 weeks for, the language you use. That's not going to be effective.
Right.
Let's have the counseling session about, in fact, I'm thinking of something where a young person did something that they posted something on their wall that a typical 19-year-old would have posted thinking it was a joke, and somebody took offense at it. And of course, it didn't need to blow up to the point of being sexual harassment Title IX. It could have been that's not funny, this is why, da-da-da-da. And of course, it ended up in my office, and I took that approach. Mm-hmm. And I remember distinctly saying to the person, okay, what do you want to do? Consequences and rolling it in. Well, I'm a business major. I said, oh, so you'd like to be a CEO someday? Oh, yeah, sure. I said, okay. Scenario. You just started working at such and such a bank. You're in your little cubicle, and you take that sign you just had and you put it on the outside of your cubicle as a joke, because it's funny, and the bank president walks by and looks at your little sign. Do you think you're going to be promoted?
Bye, Felicia.
Consequences.
Yeah, the answer was, they immediately looked at me and went, no. And I said, so then where are we with this? And, I could see the light bulb.
Good. Yeah.
There were some other people who were like, he needs to be suspended. No. That's, there needs to be a consequence, but let's not go overboard with this.
Yeah.
So, again, and that has to, and again, it's also in our personal relationships. Mm-hmm. I don't remember who said this, but I remember hearing it coming along somewhere that we all start out in a relationship with a certain amount of credit.
Yeah.
And some people can run that credit out quicker than others, but when somebody does something that's you're not comfortable with, that's not physical or insulting or just a slight.
Yeah.
To blow up and scream and holler and have a fit is a little over the top.
Yeah.
Say, hey, do me a favor, don't do that.
I do think we have to take teachable moments, especially in our young people. We have to take teachable moments and actually make them teachable moments. We really do. And with that, I'll ask you both. I'll ask you first, Bob, because you're a male. We talked about how we've seen that it's hard for women and girls to establish boundaries, or even just to come to that notion to understand I can set and establish boundaries for myself. So with that thought, I want to ask with our boys and our young men, because it seems that it's just inherent, that it's okay for boys and young men to set boundaries. How do we encourage that? How do we encourage our young men to set boundaries without pushing them towards aggression, without pushing them towards the far end to where, it becomes more than confidence, and then it can actually step into abuse where they feel like,
Sure.
Everybody's just supposed to fall in line with them.
Sure. Again, I guess this is kind of a really broad philosophical statement, but you and I both know from the workouts that we engage in, the confident martial artist doesn't have to fight.
Yes.
The confident martial artist does not have to go out there and prove themselves. There's that, and I think that's the way we should be going about teaching young men. I tried to be an athlete coming along, and I like sports like football and lacrosse. And you and I both train at boxing gyms. And you control, and at the end of it, you shake hands. There's that, and unfortunately, I've seen it more than once now. It seems to be getting lost. That needs to be instilled from day one, coming up. That this is the expectation, and you can make your point without raising your voice.
Yes.
You can also make your point with a look, as opposed to a fist.
Yes.
And again, there's that. Again, the confident martial artist does not have to prove themselves. They're it's that. And I think a lot of that is self-confidence. I mean, I'm just thinking about myself growing up and where I was, things at that time there was a lot of lack of confidence on a lot of people's parts. But again, if that had been worked on from day one. So I think like I said, that's me. That's where I stand with that. Again, it's that whole broad philosophical statement. The confident person does not have to constantly go out there and say, "Hey, look at me."
You're right.
They let their life and their being speak for themselves or speak for itself.
Minister Winder, what do you think? How can we encourage our boys to set boundaries without pushing them towards aggression?
I think I'm going to just kind of lean in. Again, like Bob said, I think, again, boundaries are established and set out of your love for people. And I think, when people, and again, people can pick up if you're genuine and authentic or not. And I think it feels like in the spaces that I've been in with the guys, it feels like when they know that you love them and you care for them, and it comes across that way in how you handle and facilitate things, then it's easy for you to assist them in, like you said, empowering them to set boundaries where it's not coming across aggressive or it's, coming at you as opposed to, but understanding that it's totally out of a demonstration of your love for them. I remember hiring tons of young people. Majority of them were boys when I worked in recruiting. Young men, I will say, 18 and 17 years old. And I remember being in a certain space with them to the point that they were like, "You like my aunt, you like my mom, you like my..." But they picked up again that authenticity, the love, the concern, the care. Again, because that's out of the own integrity of my heart. When people can sense that and pick that up, they are open. And so when you share, they may come one way. You say, well, you might want to think about that a little bit. Because to your point, Bob, the example that you gave earlier, when you turned that situation around, had that person view it from another perspective, it was an eye-opener because that's the key. And then you can empower them to make a better decision, to make a better move the next time, to do something a little bit different. And even be apologetic about the actions that they've demonstrated because it's way off. It's wrong. You know what I mean? And so I do think helping our guys and our young men to understand out of love that, again, you want to be careful how it comes across. I think when it moves into aggression and things like that, it's because it's being facilitated out of a different space that's not healthy. It's just not good.
Can I add something to what you just said, which is very true, and it clicked back in my head. There is a big difference between the tough guy and strength.
Yes.
Strength. People who have a kind heart and are willing to work from that space, it takes more strength to be kind than it does to be mean, plain and simple.
Yes.
And it's something we need to teach coming forward. It's okay to have a kind heart. It's okay to, if you're looking at something and it hurts, then it hurts. Deal with that hurt. Because again, and I know this, especially with males, they will internalize a hurt and hold on it for God knows how long, and then it comes out another way. That's not healthy. Punching a door, punching a hurt, whatever. Screaming and hollering. I told you, I spoke at one rally and I talked about somebody holding on to a story for 50-some years. And a gentleman came out of the crowd. He was in his 60s and literally put his head on my shoulder and cried. He said, that's my story. He held his story for 50-some years because he was afraid to open up and let it go. And we have to start crossing that street. It's okay to open things up a little bit.
Create that space.
Yeah, it's okay.
It sounds like how, we've talked previously about how boys are told men don't cry. Men don't show their emotions, and you got to keep the only emotion you can show is anger. You can't be scared, you can't be afraid, you can't be sensitive, you can't cry, you can't feel upset. It sounds like that you're saying that we instill in them from the beginning. You can have emotions, you can feel, you can process them correctly, and you can do so confidently without stepping over, on that far end to where you're needing to hurt someone to make yourself feel better or look better.
What you just said with the crying, the first time I was in a learning circle on a reservation where I was doing some work with indigenous people, there were some things that really hit me. And I'm, and I was trying to speak and trying not to cry. Because it really did. I mean, it really just the kindness of the people that I was working with at Pineberry, it just overwhelmed me. And somebody said, "Hey, it's okay to cry. It doesn't make you weak. It's okay." And that was an aha moment for me at age 60, whatever.
Yeah.
And that needs to be taught, because that's not a sign of weakness. It just means something's resonated with you.
Yes.
You acknowledge it, and then you work forward with it. That's what I'm saying. That kind heart. It takes more strength to have the kind heart than it does to have the mean heart.
Absolutely. And Luv Bay, we are just over the hour. And so I am going to ask you, Bob and Minister Wanda, if you would just leave Luv Bay with your final words on setting healthy boundaries. What would you like to leave our listeners with, Minister Wanda?
Sure, that boundaries are because of you, because of loving people, because you love people, you love what you're looking for in terms of the outcome. I will say that it is okay. I give you permission to set boundaries. I encourage you to set boundaries. I hope that you set boundaries. Looking forward to the day that you set boundaries, because it is to protect you, because you love you and you love those that are in your space. One other thing I'll say about boundaries, that it is indeed okay for men to cry. I've given my husband permission to cry, and the confidence in our marriage has changed the face of our marriage. And I told him that I need him to cry, that my daughter needs to see that. So it's important, and boundaries help to produce that atmosphere. So please do set boundaries.
Yes. Bob, your final words to Luv Bay?
Again, I'll get back to what I said during the run of the conversation. Every relationship, work, romantic life, whatever, there has to be healthy boundaries.
Yes.
And the boundaries have to have integrity. They don't jump around. And if you're in a situation where your boundaries that are reasonable and healthy for you are not respected, then you're probably not in the right situation for you.
Yes.
Keep on journeying down the path, because that right situation's out there. You'll walk into it. Don't stay in the one that's not right.
Awesome. Thank you both so much.
Yes,
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Minister Wanda. Luv Bay. They each will be back at some point. Luv Bay.
Thanks for the heads up.
Right? Now you know.
Get the helmet on.
Luv Bay, if you want to catch up on previous episodes from the program, you can visit our YouTube channel, Suffering in Silence TV. Thank you for joining Suffering in Silence with Minister Tia on Luv Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We're here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. Luv Bay, we are continuing to rise out of the ashes together. Good evening.